We're back, and what better way to return than with a first for this channel, a spotlight of a Masters of the Universe figure. But it's not any ordinary figure because this one comes from the Masters of the Universe Transformers crossover line in the form of Scare Glow in Starscream armor. Display ideas, comparisons, and my take on which Starscream I really think inspired the armor for this figure. All this and more, only at Heroic Nonsense. Let's go. So I never really thought I'd end up reviewing a Masters of the Universe figure on this channel, even though I enjoyed the cartoon back in the day, and my boys have some of the recent re-releases of the 80s toys. I certainly didn't think I'd end up getting any of the recent Transformers crossover figures, though I did have a passing interest in them when they were announced. However, I just couldn't resist when I saw Scare Glow and Starscream armor on the shelf while down south for some vacation, and my kids were all over it. So here we are, and I have to say, this is a totally fun figure. It's so out there, it kinda works. Though it did take some time for me to wrap my head around the concept and design. Now that we have it in our collection, I'm pretty much hooked. I don't necessarily think it's for everyone though, and if it wasn't for the fact that we had some He-Man figures already, I likely would have skipped it. However, if you're a fan of the original Masters of the Universe figures, or even a Transformers completionist, this might just be your next vice. Now, I always felt that the He-Man figures from the 80s were an acquired taste. Their bodies were always a bit, exaggerated. If I had a choice, I'd have gone for the more recent updated versions of the figures, at least design-wise. But like I said in the intro, we have a nice respectable amount of these original re-releases in our collection, and they are quite fun. I can see why kids back in the day would have enjoyed playing with them, especially with how great the cartoon was. This figure totally plays into that overall feel, and in my opinion, does quite a nice job of it. You still get that He-Man figure look, but with some innovative Transformers related aesthetics, which ultimately looks pretty good for a Starscream inspired Masters of the Universe figure. Not only that, but they went with the coronation version of Starscream from the '86 movie, cape and all, appropriate for a tribute to the original Scare Glow figure. Even better, based on my bit of research into Scare Glow, it looks like he had a similar disdain for his master Skeletor as Starscream did for Megatron, so the character selections also match up. Now that we've gotten a bit of the backstory out of the way and explained how these two characters work conceptually, let's jump into the figure itself. Well, you can see that the base elements of the figure are in fact those of Scare Glow. Most of the figure is taken up by a completely new design specific to Starscream, from the very F-15 inspired chestplate to the striking blue highlights and of course that mask and helmet. I do like how they borrowed from both characters' designs to come up with a very unique head sculpt blending in Starscream's overall style and robotic look with a skull-based face as an homage to Scare Glow's skeletal appearance. What I really like is how they incorporated Starscream's wings and lasers into the armor's appearance, giving Scare Glow not only some extra firepower, but a very cool look with those wings, which are so iconic to the Seeker's design in the Transformers line. They also, as I said earlier, borrowed the coronation elements from Starscream with those purple shoulder pads and long flowing cape, which Transformers fans will immediately recognize. And for a plastic-based cape, it's really nicely detailed with some great texture. For an added play and display feature, the winged laser weapons can be used as handheld axes, which is a really cool way to incorporate this very Transformers Seekers based aesthetic. And you even get a bonus accessory, the crown Starscream wore once he crowned himself leader of the Decepticons after Megatron's supposed death in the 1986 Transformers movie, quite appropriate for this Scare Glow figure as well. And finally, a callback to the original Scare Glow figure, some glow-in-the-dark action, though only for the top portion, which I still think looks awesome, especially for the skeletal mask. Overall, a really fun Masters of the Universe figure that has a neat little way of incorporating both the He-Man and Transformers lore into one, and given all the technological elements to the original storyline and figures, this totally works. Let's now jump right into the comparison section and see how Scare Glow in Starscream's armor measures up to the rest of the original figures. We unfortunately don't have a Scare Glow figure to directly compare to, but we do have a good amount of the other figures in the same 80s design, which gives you an overall sense of how this version of Scare Glow could potentially fit into your MOTU collection. Personally, I think he fits right in, especially within the wide range of characters and designs already existing within the He-Man universe. As for how he compares with the Transformers line, and specifically his inspiration, Coronation Starscream, well, that's a bit more of a stretch. But first, let's see how they compare in design, and it's easy to see what elements were borrowed, especially when it comes to the coronation pieces. But I actually think much of the design inspiration actually comes from this version of Starscream from Combiner Wars, specifically as it relates to the chest and air intakes design, as well as the coloring and overall sleek aesthetic. Even the head has a much more Combiner Wars feel to it, with the angular features being a prominent example of this. Whichever version of the Starscream figure you prefer to pair him with, I don't think these two versions necessarily pair well together for a display. They're just so different. If anything, the MOTU Transformers Scare Glow figure is really meant to be used and displayed with the He-Man figures, and that's where we plan on keeping him. However, if you are a fan of Transformers and the crossover figures, there is another fun way to display Scare Glow. And that's with all the other Transformers crossover figures. Scale is completely thrown out the window here, but as a display of crossover figures, it totally works. So now let's truly get into the display section of this spotlight, and we'll start with one of my favorite ideas. Scare Glow in Starscream's armor on the Landshark. And why, pray tell, is this one of my favorite ideas? Simply because it reminds me of the late run of the original Transformers line Action Masters figures, where the Transformers lost the ability to transform and were relegated to using vehicles as modes of transportation and weapons, which was also reflected in the toys themselves. They also look really good together, the mechanical based Scare Glow figure with the mechanical Landshark, both very sleek and terrorizing, a perfect team up of character and vehicle. As for a general display, you can't go wrong with some other MOTU characters in front of Castle Grayskull. And honestly, I think he fits right in, especially as part of this colorful band of evildoers. By the way, can anyone spot the one figure in our collection which is an original from the 80s? Let me know if you found him in the comments section. I do particularly like pairing him with Skeletor and Anti-Eternia He-Man, at least until we get Skeletor in Megatron's armor. But as far as these two go, they look great together. I always kind of imagined Skeletor as a Megatron type character anyway. And yes, I do know about that whole debate around whether Scare Glow is Skeletor's ghost versus a ghost in his service. Either way, it still works. Another great pairing is Scare Glow with Hordak, since Starscream would likely have paired with anyone who could help him overthrow Skeletor/Megatron. Hordak and his minions are more out there anyway, so why not place this version of Scare Glow with them? You can have a lot of fun with this figure in the castle. While we don't have any version of Snake Mountain, Castle Grayskull is a very nice alternative, and highlights in this theme the tension between Scare Glow and Skeletor. Taking some inspiration from the Transformers line, a Scare Glow in Starscream's armor towering over a fallen Skeletor is definitely one great way to go. You know this would play out this way in whatever alternate universe a Starscream or his armor existed in. It will definitely be fun to recreate this scene though once we get the Skeletor in Megatron's armor figure. And once Skeletor was out of his way, Scare Glow would likely try to tame Panther. Whether he would actually be successful in doing that remains to be seen, but it does make for one hell of a nice display. At the same time, that orange throne makes a nice replacement one for the purple throne Starscream briefly sat on in the Transformers movie, though in this case, not as easy to place him in given his rubbery cloak. I have to say, I always liked this playset even though I didn't have it as a kid growing up, and it looks great here with all these figures placed inside. Wish we had a playset like this for our Transformers collection, would make for some epic displays. So, tons of ways you can have fun with this figure, but before we go, I have to preview one more. While away, we managed to find a He-Man in Optimus Prime's armor, so of course, we had to get him. Not sure whether I'll do a full separate review of him in the future, or combine him with Skeletor in Megatron's armor once we find him, but at least I wanted to give you an idea of how he looked as part of this line. I typically don't spend much time on the box art unless it really stands out, but in this case, it definitely deserves a detailed look. The front is so attention grabbing it's impossible to not be interested in it, especially with how they create those Transformers inspired grid lines of Eternia with Snake Mountain in the background, and the nice use of both iconic logos, with a nice image of Scare Glow in the distance. And if that wasn't enough, one of the side panels has a perfect image of Starscream with the Transformers logo, one of my favorite drawn versions of him on a box to date. The back panel also has some nice detail and a bonus image of Scare Glow in the Starscream armor. Do any of you get a bludgeon feel to him here like I do? Also, it looks to me like that scrap he's standing on is the remains of the Decepticon ship the Nemesis, with one of Hordak's Horde troopers lying destroyed off to the side. And finally, a great bit of lore building up at the top left, combining ideas from both Transformers and He-Man. As for the other side panel, a really nice rendition of Scare Glow in the same art form with the Masters of the Universe logo. I really think they went all in for the designs of these packages. And one more bonus, a Transformers inspired tech specs readout on the inside flap for Starscream's armor, reminiscent of the tech specs from the original 80s toy on the back of pack. A fun little read and callback. And finally, the figure comes with a mini comic book, which I believe all the original He-Man figures came with, or at least the recent re-releases. And I really love the art in it, definitely something to keep in your collection for toy and comic fans alike. Reminds me a bit of the art by Andrew Wildman from the original run of the later era Transformers comics. So that brings us to the end of this week's first of its kind spotlight on heroic nonsense. Hope you enjoyed it, whether you're a He-Man fan, Transformers fan, or a general fan of all things 80s. Heads up that there won't be a full episode next week, but after that, it's guns a-blazing with no breaks for a while in between. And man, do I have a lot of new toys to review. See you all next time, and remember, it's all such heroic nonsense in the end.
Transform!